Spare the rod and spoil the child. Um, Being a student teacher, you're of course not allowed to do corporal punishment. But let's go ahead and look at just the history of it, because sometimes you say, well, should I, when I become a full certified and paid teacher, should I swing the paddle or not? And also sometimes as a student teacher, you will see your mentor teacher or your school supervisor using the paddle. So I always like to do a little lecture on just corporal punishment so that you can have a general idea about this. Especially like sometimes you'll have a supervisor who says, well, paddling does work or paddling doesn't work. And we don't really want to say, I'll never paddle and then walk away. But we want to go ahead and be able to have an educated discussion about it so that we can figure out what's going on and where it's going to leave you when you go into the real world when you're getting paid and you have your classroom by yourself. And you'll hear sometimes the paddling occurring, and you'll think, should I do that or should I not? So I give you two articles this week, Spare the Rod and Spoil the Child, and then I gave an article which discusses, I believe, Taiwan and their banning of it altogether, where the person interviewed some teachers about it. That article's really not critical towards the end to read, but I would read the first part, which definitely gives you the pros and cons. We'll go over that as well, because that's where the real good meat of the article is. This article actually is really good because it gives you a legal breakdown of it. I'll just highlight some sections as I read it. One thing is, we've heard this many times, in loco parentis, which means because you're in place of the parent, that you're in charge. Some parents do paddle, so therefore you're allowed to paddle in some schools, and that's one reason why that paddling was there. Many school boards have abandoned its use, at least in part because of parental wishes. But look at this part right here. It says there's been a shift in legal status of corporal punishment, and that is true. A lot of lawsuits have emerged, and people kind of get concerned about that. Before the enactment of state statutes, educators had the right to administer reasonable corporal punishment to misbehaving students. So before states started passing laws banning corporal punishment, school teachers had the right to do corporal punishment. So make sure you understand that element of that. That just like teaching is a right, you actually had a right to do corporal punishment. It was kind of like you're a school teacher in loco parentis. Parents are allowed to spank their children, so therefore you're allowed to spank the children too. That's where that comes from. And now, so kind of like it's a natural right almost. You have a right to paddle students because of loco parentis. Should you? Well, that's when states start limiting that. Baker versus Owen is that's one of the citations right there. And then as we scroll down, let's scroll up here. Let me go to the section right here. It says, however, corporal punishment is still common in many parts of the American South and the Southwest. It is not contrary to state level provisions. Board policies on corporal punishment generally control. Even so, the use of unreasonable corporal punishment or behavior that violates board policy or state laws can serve as a case for dismissing teachers. So that's where the first thing the article discusses that kind of gives a hint at it. We have to be careful with corporal punishment because it actually is something that you're going to be doing that could lead to you getting dismissed. So if I said I want you to teach class, but if you teach class you could get fired if you do it wrong, well, that would be one where you're going to take a hesitation. So that's what the theme about corporal punishment is, hesitation. That's the main key word I want to give you, is hesitation. Because we want to do what's best for our teaching environment. Okay, so I say use a smart board, and you go, okay, I'll use a smart board. What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, there's really nothing bad. It could fall down and hurt me. Well, that's not really much of hesitation. So you go ahead and use the smart board. I say ask questions in class. Okay, what's nothing? There's really not much issues that can happen there. Paddle a student. Well, if I paddle a student, the student will behave better, or that's a quick punishment. It's fast. It's easy. It's something that's definitely going to reinforce a negative behavior. So I say, okay, but you could get fired. Well, that's where you're going to get your hesitation from. And you go, wait a minute. So that's the recurring theme when it comes to corporal punishment is there are so many lawsuits, there's so many civil punishments, news media, videotaping, that's going to cause you to hesitate on that. Supreme Court cases. So let's look at the actual legal element. The big Supreme Court case was 1977, which was Ingram versus Wright, and the Supreme Court said that corporal punishment was not unconstitutional. So the Supreme Court ruled that corporal punishment was a right of teachers. It's nothing that's wrong with it, and yes, you can do that. So they did not want to address if it was constitutional or not. They just said, hey, that's a right. So that's the whole point. So everybody's like, okay, well, we can do it then. And right now, it's going to give you ordinary. The punishment was limited to 1 to 5 licks or blows with the paddle. So that's where we started saying, well, how many times can you hit somebody with corporal punishment? Well, depends on state statute. According to the Supreme Court, educators viewed corporal punishment as a less drastic means of discipline than suspension or expulsion. So you have to, that's one reason why teachers used it, was I don't have to worry about suspending a student. I can just do a quick paddling. When one of the plaintiffs was slow to respond to his teacher's instructions, he received more than 20 swats with a paddle while being restrained over a table in the principal's office. From here down pretty much to here is giving you the facts of the case. The Supreme Court affirmed that corporal punishment was a right, even though it was, in that case, it was done pretty bad, but it confirmed it was right. And they affirmed in the case of the favor of the students, of the teachers. So with that court case, Supreme Court has said it's okay. So we've always, for 100 years, we've had corporal punishment. We get to 1977. We have a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says yes, that's okay. All right. So now we start having some other things right here in rulings. Let's look at some lower court cases. It talks about, but look at this. Yet the court did not adequately address whether the egregious behavior by school officials violated the statutory prohibition about being degrading. So all the court really said was it's constitutional, but they didn't say anything about if they're going, it's excessive. The court deferred to the authority of the educators, and they would not rule on if it was unconstitutional. They just said, hey, well, they said, well, is corporal punishment constitutional? Yes. Is it excessive? Then is it unconstitutional? We don't want to talk about that. So is excessive corporal punishment unconstitutional? Well, they wouldn't address that. Interesting. The court decided that absent a state law or board policy to the contrary, parental disapproval of corporal punishment did not forbid educators from using it on students. So if your school does not have a letter that parents have to sign to allow it, or parents can opt out, then the school can require your child to use corporal punishment. So because of that, you start seeing after 1977 a lot of schools creating policies, creating also exemptions where, for example, you can get 3 licks or suspension. So they are giving you options to that because we don't want to be holding people over a table and spanking them as that case was. We see more action in the lower courts after 1977 because the Supreme Court's not going to hear this anymore. So in the lower courts, you start seeing that people start bringing these cases up. And the first of 3 cases where courts determined that educators exceeded the scope of their authority. And so you start seeing these cases right here. And look at this. They affirmed the denial. Remember that. So what would happen is many times a coach or a teacher would paddle a student, and the student would sue that coach. And when you see this legal term about denied the immunity, well, the coach or the teacher would say, I'm immune to the lawsuit because I am operating as an educator. Well, the lower courts ruled that when you are doing something excessive, then you are no longer immune to that. So let me give you an example. Let's say a cop arrests me and the cop handcuffs me and I'm allergic to steel. I'm allergic to metal. Well, then I sue and they say, well, you can't really sue the cop because the cop was doing his job. He didn't know you was allergic to metal. All right, so that's an obvious he didn't do anything wrong. So the court will say, yes, you can't sue the individual cop. You can probably sue the police station, but you can't sue the individual cop. He's immune to that because he was just doing his job. All right, so let's say you sue, the cop starts beating me up. Well, then yes, you can sue him because he's not immune to it. He's not doing a part of his job. He's just beating people up. Same case as a teacher who paddles too much. If you paddle too hard, if you've hurt somebody, then therefore you are no longer immune to the lawsuit. So I've circled a lot of notes right here. New Mexico could be subject to liability where educators twice disciplined a 9-year-old girl by holding her upside down by her ankles and striking her on the shins with a broken stick that broke her skin. All right, so this is 1980s. You actually had someone spanking a child upside down. And you read that and you're going, what? Well, then they sued, and the school district said, well, we were immune. We were doing corporal punishment. And the lower court said, no, 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 you're not immune. You're getting sued for this because you can't hold somebody upside down twice that way. So the court observed that the coach hit the student so hard that he literally knocked the player's left eye out of its socket. So therefore, he wasn't immune. So you start seeing restrictions on corporal punishment, and that's when people's like, wait a minute, this is insane. So they were actually holding people upside down and hitting them with a stick. Coaches were hitting somebody so hard that they were losing their eyesight. Well, and then they would actually go to court saying, I'm immune. I can do corporal punishment. So it makes you wonder what corporal punishment was prior to the 1977 decision, before all of these people start saying we need to restrain this. So the Supreme Court ruled in 1977 that it was constitutional. But then after that, we start seeing lower courts ruling that some of these acts were excessive and no longer open to immunity. On 2 occasions, the Fifth Circuit refused to impose liability on school officials. And this is showing you an example where they came back and they were like, wait a minute, we're not going to make the person liable. The court pointed out that state statutory and common area law provisions offered better redress. So now we start seeing this. Federal court starts saying the state has better provisions. So they start pushing for the states to have their own laws and their own regulation of corporal punishment. And that's good, which states need to do that. Let's see. All right, so now right here, this section right here starts talking about grabbing students. And for example, in the 7th court, a court specified that when a teacher in Illinois grabbed a student by her wrist and elbow to escort her from the classroom, he did not violate her rights to substantive due process. So I don't want to beat a dead horse on this one, but what you're seeing is hesitation once again, and also limitation of it. All right, so 1940, I'm a school teacher. I can beat a child apparently upside down with a stick. All right, so that's not going to be questioned. By 1977, we have, is it legal to do corporal punishment? Well, yes, it is. And then after 1977, we start seeing lawsuits about, well, okay, yeah, you can't hang a child upside down and hit them. That's you're not immune to that. You can't hit somebody so hard their eye socket comes out. No, you can't do that. You're not immune. Well, okay, can I grab a student and escort them out if they're fighting? Well, yes, you can. So you start seeing legal action come into play anytime a teacher touches, hits, and questions stuff like that. So that's going to cause teachers to have hesitation, because should I even bother with, if there's a fight breaking out, should I bother breaking it up? Should I bother touching the child, because we are becoming a lawsuit? And so everybody starts saying, we're a lawsuit-happy society. No, we're not. We're not. It's just, this is what happens when you start having legal issues start trying to define where it is. So we're trying to scope it in. Where is the boundary of touching? So it's a very interesting time, definitely. Grab the arm of a student and pull him towards doors. So they said that you can do that. That's fine. Clearly, and this is where corporal punishment is a controversial practice that can leave educators and school boards subject to liability. There's the #1 quote right there. Subject to liability. Lawsuits scare students. Lawsuits scare anybody. They scare teachers. They scare principals. No one wants to be sued. No one wants to lose money. So because of that, many school districts have said it's not worth the headache. Also, many school districts are insured by an underwriter who insures them from lawsuits. So for example, if you get sued for $1 million, the school district's only going to have to pay like $10,000, but the insurance company's going to have to pay more. They have that all the time. Many times their premiums will be higher if they paddle. So sometimes you're like, well, why are we paying $50,000 over 5 years for insurance premiums when we're paying so much for, well, let's just eliminate paddling and we'll have less insurance premiums. Very simple as that. All right, so that's definitely becoming a question. It's dangerous with liability. If boards choose to employ corporal punishment, school business officials acting in conjunction with other education leaders should consider the following limitations. So this actually lists you the limitations. Require prior written consent, limit the number of times someone can be paddled, have parents come in for conferences. Look at all this just to paddle a student. So that's why many times schools go, I just don't want to deal with this. I don't want to deal with this. I have known school teachers who have been sued for paddling, and usually after they're sued for paddling, they never paddle again. Even if they don't have to pay any money, they say it's not worth it, and I don't want to do it again. It's putting myself out there for no reason at all. So the legal answer, if you ask me, can I paddle? Yes, you can paddle if according to your school district allows you. Now we're talking about not student teachers. We're talking about first off, student teachers cannot paddle. Make sure we mark that as 16th minute in. You cannot paddle as a student teacher. But when you become a regular full-time teacher, can you paddle? It depends on your school policy. It depends on the state policy. So you need to look at that. And I'm sure that if there is paddling, there's a lot of rules and regulations you have to go along with that. Now it comes into the other issue, should you paddle? Well, that's going to go to the Taiwan article that we're going to look at. But should you paddle? That's going to be something that you're going to have to look at. We're not going to answer that question. We're not going to be able to answer, legally, ethically, morally, does it have a positive effect on someone? Personally, I don't like being sued, so I would not paddle because you're going to have to be careful with lawsuits, liability. If you're okay with living on the edge and you might get sued, and if you hit somebody too high and you hit them in the kidneys, they're going to be bruised. Do you want to be on that one? Add a final element that this article does not talk about, and that is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, cell phone videos, cameras. People are videotaping people getting paddled, and they're showing these images online. Do you want to be? There's one. I may show it. There's one from Georgia. I'll show that, where a principal and assistant principal are paddling a 5-year-old kindergarten student for spitting on people, and the parent consented to the paddling, and they were just going to give him one hit. Well, the parent then videotaped it. The principal and the assistant principal did everything by the book. They did not do anything wrong, and they followed school procedure. They did not get in trouble. The child, I don't think, even got paddled, but because he kept squirming. The parent videotaped it and put it online. So even though the assistant principal and the principal did nothing wrong, by having that kid squirm like that, there were death threats against them. People were sending letters to the school saying they should get fired. And their reputation really is just not good because people are always, that video is going to follow them forever. I'm going to find that video and I'm going to show it next. And then I'm going to show you another video about, it's a PBS about discussion of corporal punishment. And then we're going to finish up with the Taiwan article. So let's go ahead and I'm going to show you right now the Georgia video.
Next to the growing outrage after a piece of video showing 2 adults at an elementary school in Georgia preparing to paddle a 5-year-old child. It's perfectly legal in that state and in 18 other states. But parents across this country are divided. ABC's Steve Osunsami with the video and the debate tonight.
I'm not fighting that. You're gonna get a spanking.
Georgia police say what you're about to see in a public grade school is perfectly legal. The 5-year-old's mother, who recorded the video, gave her consent to school officials to paddle her son after they say the boy fought with other children and then spat on a teacher.
Thank you.
For many parents who've seen this tonight, it's deeply disturbing, and for many others, just fine.
Thank you.
But 22-year-old Shayna Perez now says she felt pressured to let them hit her child. worried she'd be sent to jail after more than 3 weeks of his unexcused absences.
I wish that I could go back and stop all this. I'd have snatched him up and said, take me to jail. You know what? Suspend him. I don't care.
Georgia is one of at least 19 states that still allows corporal punishment in schools. An estimated 167,000 public school children are physically disciplined every year. Authorities here in Jasper County say they never threaten Perez with jail.
So you do spank him?
Yeah. But I mean, they were shaking him around and holding him down. And I mean, you don't do something like that to a 5-year-old baby.
The school says because of privacy issues, they can't discuss details of this case, but tell us they're re-examining discipline issues, underlining that corporal punishment is allowed here with parental consent.
Well, now to a video that is leading to outrage across the country. It shows administrators at a school in Georgia paddling a 5-year-old boy. This incident was secretly recorded by the child's own mother.
For a Jasper County mother is trying to explain why she allowed her 5-year-old son to be paddled at school. Yes, there are circumstances, but this video is tough to see and to hear, and this video has gone viral. My Facebook page is blowing up. Everyone's weighing in on this. Channel 2's Barrett Peterson, live outside Jasper County Primary School, where the kindergarten had already missed 18 days this year.
All right, now Shayna Perez says her son missed those days at this school because he had tests for possible cancer. She says she was arrested because of that and thought she'd be on her way back to jail if she did not agree to her son's paddling. Shayna Perez says through good times and bad, she loves her son.
He's 5. He's not the best child. I mean, he's probably worse than some other people's children. I mean, but it's not the way that we're raising him. We haven't raised him to be bad.
On Wednesday, Perez recorded this video of administrators at Jasper County Primary School attempting to paddle her son Thomas for spitting on a fellow student. Perez says she only agreed to it to avoid jail.
If he gets suspended, I'm going to be arrested for truancy. If he misses another day, I'm going to be arrested. She never denied that. She never told me anything otherwise.
Sheriff Donnie Pope says Perez was recently arrested after her son missed 18 days of school, but says the principal was not holding more jail time over her head.
We were able to confirm that the school did not tell her that.
Parents we talked to are appalled by the video.
Well, she gave verbal consent, but she shouldn't have given the consent for 1. And for 2, yeah, I think she should have something done about it because of the way they were holding him down and stuff.
Jasper County Schools allows corporal punishment if a parent consents. Shayna Perez now says she shouldn't have.
To be honest, if I could go back, I would have just grabbed him up and said, you know what, no, you can't paddle him. Just go ahead and take me to jail.
Now, as for the test for cancer and the 18 absences, the sheriff could not confirm that the test took place. The school system would not comment, and Perez and her son are going to meet with administrators here tomorrow. For our live Jasper County, Barrett Peterson, Channel 2 Action News.
And the dialogue that's happening on Facebook right now, there are the circumstances, and people are debating that, and then there are those who say they don't care what the circumstances are. They don't want a public school, an arm of the state, sanctioned to hit a child. Facebook, go there now.
But first, a new investigation examines the use of corporal or physical punishment in public schools. And that is the focus of our weekly education segment, Making the Grade. The practice is far less common than it used to be, but a report in the journal Education Week finds that it is still utilized in 21 states, and more than 100,000 children were physically punished in one recent year. Proponents say it can be an effective way to motivate children to behave, but much research suggests otherwise. We begin with the story of a 19-year-old in Mississippi, Trey Clayton, who was paddled repeatedly in high school because of discipline problems. The piece was produced by our partners at Education Week. Mississippi leads the nation in the percentage of schools that use corporal punishment.
My name is Trey Clayton. I'm 19 now. My paddling took place at Independence High School, 8th grade. School's fun. Got along with everybody. I was a good student. I didn't do my schoolwork. I didn't do my homework. But, you know, I did good on my test. I guess I was happy to sit at school when I was playing football. spent a lot of years in school getting in trouble. Been caught with cigarettes, arguing with people, trying to fight people and stuff. Ran my mouth a lot. Didn't really like getting told what to do. But if I had the choice to get paddling, I'd usually choose paddling just to get it over with, because I didn't want to spend time in school suspension, ISS, or because my parents has always told me, you know, don't ever choose suspension. You know, because you can't miss school. You don't need to miss school. Just like any other day. I'm in trouble, my buddy's in trouble. So we're talking, the librarian start, you know, telling us to hush. I just had something smart to say back. And, but I know I was gonna get paddled. I chose paddling. So I get 3 licks. He starts escorting me to class. We walk out of his office. I went to walk around him and just woke up on the floor. I felt something in my mouth. And I start, hold my hand out, just see what it is, and I start spitting out teeth, like shards of my teeth. I've done bit through both sides of my tongue. I've got 1 tooth already missing, and my jaw's broke. And my mouth stayed wired shut for 6 weeks. When all this happened, we was taking what they call a 9 weeks test, and in the middle of them is when all this happened, so I never finished them. They never gave me the opportunity to retake them, so it failed me for that year. When I had to go back to the 8th grade at the same school, I just didn't go to school much, and I failed again until finally I was just like, there's no sense in me staying, doing this. Where you going, Ellie? Well, I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. Now the 2-year-old is not mine, but I take care of her as she is mine. But I love them. I love them to death. I do believe in discipline, you know what I'm saying? I do believe they need to know what's right and what's wrong. But what happened to me, I wouldn't want to happen to them. I wouldn't want them to deal with that.
Trey Clayton's family filed a lawsuit against the school district, but they lost. The family eventually dropped the case. The current school superintendent in that district says corporal punishment is still used there, but that it's, quote, used very judiciously now. Jeffrey Brown has a closer look at all of this with Sarah Sparks of the Education Week team.
Sarah Sparks, welcome to you. I think a lot of people would be surprised at the continuing prevalence of this, and were you and your colleagues?
We were a little surprised at how many states are still using corporal punishment. We found 21 states and more than 4,000 schools were using physical discipline.
All different age levels, grade levels.
Absolutely. We found from kindergarten all the way up through high school, there were at least some students at every level.
Also surprising and notable in your stories were how much policies can and do vary state to state and even within states.
Right. In some districts, it was even school by school differences. There is no official training, not much guidance, and not a whole lot of accountability on how corporal punishment gets meted out.
What about law?
We have 29 states who have outlawed corporal punishment. 21 allow it to some degree or another. And from state to state, the policies and practices differ tremendously.
So define terms here. What do we mean by corporal punishment?
We use the federal government's definition, which is generally paddling, spanking, any physical discipline that is done to a child.
Did you find other kinds of punishment?
We did. The data set that we used doesn't differentiate by what implement gets used. We found everything from paddling with a 20-inch wooden paddle to some cases of chemical spray or even a taser.
And we should say the data comes from the federal government, right? Civil rights?
Right. This is the most recent civil rights data from the Education Department. It's for the 2013-14 school year.
You also found in the data a disproportionate cases involved African-American children and lower-income children.
Right. I was very surprised that Black students were twice as likely as white students to experience corporal punishment. If you're in a state that uses corporal punishment and you're low income, you are also significantly more likely to be in a school that uses it.
So in the case of a student like Trey Clayton, who we saw in the video, do you see that as a special case or as typical?
It's typical of the risks of using corporal punishment in schools. Trey Clayton said that his corporal punishment was a little more severe than he was used to, but Trey had been paddled many times in school before, and we just don't know what made him pass out in his case, that incident.
The arguments that you often heard in favor of this are that it's an alternative to suspension, for example.
Right. We heard from people who were very much against corporal punishment all the way to people who were defending corporal punishment that this is something that can be used to get a kid disciplined quickly and bring them back to school. And it's used for everything from talking back in class to fighting in the halls. But the research shows that in the long term, it can have the exact opposite effect that educators think it will and hope it'll have. I mean, we have studies that find higher aggression rates, higher defiance of adults. There was even a recent neurological study that found students who had experienced corporal punishment several times over time had lower brain matter in the part of the brain associated with self-control. So there's some negative side effects to this.
And are people in places where they're doing this aware of that? Or what was their reaction when you pointed out the research?
For the most part, they weren't aware, but also had a sense of this is part of our community, this is something that we as educators grew up with, and the kids that we've paddled over the years have grown up to be good people. So I think there's a lot of community support in some of the areas that still heavily practice corporal punishment.
And let me ask you finally, what rights, if any, do parents have if they want to keep their children from being subjected to corporal punishment?
In some states, parents are allowed to opt their child out of corporal punishment, but that opt-out doesn't carry the force of law. And from what we've seen in the lawsuits that have been brought over the years, you don't stand a very good chance in court if you are a parent or a student who feels you were inappropriately corporally punished.
All right, Sarah Sparks of Education Week, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Georgia video, once again, just reflects that the principal and the assistant principal did everything by the book, but it appears bad when people are with social media. So I definitely would not, there's no win situation right there. That a parent's telling you, I don't want my child suspended, go ahead and paddle them because I don't want to go to jail, or whatever she was saying. And the child, and then she pulls out a camera and starts videoing you secretly, and you're like, man, so what? You can't win on that one. It's obviously a bad situation. It looks terrible. It looks like they're torturing the child. So that's a video that I was just like, man. But then again, like that one woman said, the woman shouldn't have consented, but then she said, but also it looked bad. Everybody knows this looks bad. So the last article, we're not going to go in depth on it. We're going to go in depth on just a couple of pages on this one. It talks about CP, it talks about corporal punishment, and then it puts the acronym CP on there. But the whole idea of this is it talks about corporal punishment being banned in Taiwan. And they're just doing some interviews with people. The last part of the article is not really that good. I'll be the first to admit that one. But let's look at the first part because that's actually the best part of the article. It talks about schools have always been viewed as an institution for the transfer of knowledge. There's your definition of what a school is. I circled that, and I was like, man, if there's ever a test question, someone asked, what's the purpose of the school? Well, there's your answer right there. Here's your definition of corporal punishment, as defined as the infliction of physical pain on an offender for his offense or misbehavior. In 1979, Sweden banned all corporal punishment. And right here it says, look at all CP on that is humane. Look at all these reasons they said that. That's what Sweden said, and everyone did that. Why it's banned? It causes bullying, crime, and all that. Wow! And that there are alternative disciplines that you could use as a teacher instead of doing that. The lit review. This is what I really wanted to show you, just so if you ever want to have the argument. I don't want this to be a no, absolutely no corporal punishment, but if you want to have the argument for corporal punishment, this article, this right here tells you why it's good. It's also part of the old mindset of no rod, no good child, spare the rod, spoil the child. Everyone says that they, and that's one thing that the article mentions, that people actually, everyone that is successful has a story of them being corporally punished. And like, well, when I was a child, I used to be punished. So they're like, well, that's got to be a reason for that. They actually listed 6 advantages. It's cheap. It's as effective as a deterrent because no one likes physical pain. Well, that's true. It is to some extent effective as a method of reform in that the fear of physical pain will motivate a person not to offend. The fear of physical pain. Okay, so that's good. It is adjustable in that we may easily inflict different amounts of pain for different people, for different offenses. It is fair for all, since all people are similar to the dislike of pain. And it leaves no permanent or reversible damage. I would disagree with the fair for all. Some people, some people, I went to school with people who didn't mind getting paddled. It's like, I don't care. And I was scared to death of being paddled. So, but this is your reasons why, and then the disadvantages, there's all kinds of disadvantages, and they also list in this page right here the disadvantages of it may inflict real injury, obviously. It's very difficult for the recipient to engage in desirable behavior to terminate corporal punishment. It is not likely to be logically related to the misbehavior. CP may inflict real injury, and for many children, it is demeaning or indignity. And I would agree with that. I've been paddled before when I was in school. We had a teacher in 4th grade when I was going to school who everyone was reading in class, and if you did not keep up with reading, when they called your name and she said, what spot are we at? It's your turn to read. And you did not know, she would look at you and she'd say, that's a lick. So she was actually paddling people for not keeping up in reading, which today it just blows my mind today that we actually allowed that, because if people were dyslexic and everything, and if they couldn't keep up with reading, they were getting beaten. So it's insanity. That is absolute insanity that we allowed that to happen. But definitely the reason I showed you this article is because it's going to list advantages and disadvantages of corporal punishment, and many times I'll see some teachers that were student teachers before, and I'll just say, how's things going? And they'll say, oh yeah, I'm at so-and-so school. And they'll say, we're swinging the board here. We're paddling here. And I'm like, yeah. And then I actually had one tell me, he was completely honest. He said, yeah, we're paddling. And he said, I paddled a couple of students a couple of times. He said, he looked at me and went, man, I hit one of them way too hard and I quit. So just, if you're going to paddle, now you have a better perspective of it. And hopefully you have a better idea of it. Of course, you can't paddle as a student teacher, but now you have a better idea that when you go to these schools and you see paddlings. I've been a teacher for going on 17 years now. I taught 6 years in public school. I did not paddle, and we actually were allowed to paddle. I remember one time I told a student, I said, either have after school detention or I'll paddle you. And he said, I'll take paddling. And I was like, I was just kidding with him. He said, I'll take paddling right now. And I was like, man. And I just said, no, but I said, no, I don't paddle. So it was like that. So you're just like, pass. So the opportunity was there. I just never wanted to do it. I was always afraid of lawsuits. So that's the point of the articles. Hopefully you enjoyed those. And now you got an idea of where corporal punishment stands in Mississippi and the whole nation, and where we're going with it. And Mississippi, I forgot to tell you about Mississippi. Mississippi does allow corporal punishment. It's based on individual school district policies. So simple as that. You may see a homework assignment this week asking you to look at the handbook of your class and just say of your school and find out what their corporal punishment policy is. And I know some of y'all have veteran teachers who've been teaching for 25, 30 years. You can ask them. That would be a great just conversation with them about what's their viewpoint of corporal punishment, when they used to swing the paddle, if they did, when did it stop, and what made them stop. That's a good question. And many of them will tell you, I don't know what they'll tell you. That'd be a good conversation to have with them. So I hope you enjoyed the lectures and hope everything's well. Thank you for listening.